Madam Clerk, would you like a 5-minute recess or 10?
Thank you. 5-minute recess.
Well, right there, a public comment period full of shouting about a resolution from Councilmember Shama Sawant calling for a ceasefire in Gaza that received no support from her colleagues. A sign of the times, perhaps, as early election results indicate the progressive majority on the city council may be breaking apart. We're taking a look at those early returns, plus a transportation impact fee that keeps moving through the city council. And what's the story behind a newly designated protected intersection in the city of Seattle? Well, all this and more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, a special post-election podcast here, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. And my co-host is the unstoppable David Croman, transportation reporter for the Seattle Times. He does cover some politics, too. We always talk about these things. And, David, I just wanted to take a quick step back here. There was a crazy story last week I wanted to ask you about briefly. Did a King County water taxi actually run a lead block across Elliott Bay for a loose barge that ended up crashing at Pier 66? What was this?
Yeah, it was incredible. This barge came loose and was, it's hard to speculate. It seems like it could have gone really badly because it's a 380-foot barge. It's appeared to be heading for the aquarium or the Great Wheel, but this King County water taxi captain saw it and managed to kind of push it towards a less populated marina, and there's basically no harm, no foul. But I don't know. I imagine that guy will. He's been, we interviewed him and he's been in some stories, but I imagine he's going to get some kind of merit from Dow Constantine or something.
He gets to pick a shark out of the shark tank in the aquarium or something. I don't know. Yeah. That's a big deal. Thank you, David, as always, for joining me. And thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of Seattle City Hall. Thanks also to our show patrons. A shout out this week to Mackenzie. Thank you for supporting the show since February of last year, Mackenzie. Really appreciate it. We're looking for your support too, folks. At the baseline $5 level, you get your very own Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal. What a deal. Check us out on Patreon to learn more. Another note, the video version of the podcast is on Converge Media. Check it out Wednesday nights at 7. Thank you, Converge. Thank you, Mackenzie. Thanks to all of our patrons. We need you to keep this project rolling. So let's do this thing. Time for Right Here, Right Now. All right, David, here we go. The story of the early election returns, a moderate wave sweeping through the Seattle City Council, it would appear. All three incumbents are down in their races after election night returns, but not out. We have seen swings of more than 10 points in some of these races in the past, but just to break them down here, folks, District 1, Rob Saka, 58.7%, Marin Costa, 40.8%, largest lead in any race. D2, Tanya Wu, 54.2%, Tammy Morales, the incumbent, 45.3%. In District 3, Joy Hollingsworth, 58.3%, Alex Hudson, 41.4%, D4, Maritza Rivera, 55.3%, Ron Davis, 44.2%, Kathy Moore in District 5. This one's been called. Kathy Moore has this one with a 70.1% return on election night. Christiana Obey-Sumner down at 29.5%. Pete Hanning in District 6 leads that race, 50.8%. Dan Strauss, the incumbent, 48.7%, the tightest race we have out there thus far. And then in District 7, Bob Kettle, 55.8%, leading the incumbent. Andrew Lewis, 43.8%. David, just kind of throw this out there, all these different numbers. I know I threw a lot, but what do these numbers say to you?
They say to me that Bruce Harrell is probably going to have his dream city council. I mean, I think, Tammy Morales is down. I would not count her out at this point. I think that a 9-point gap for somebody as progressive as her is closable. If I had to place a bet, I would say she does close it. It's not a for sure thing. I think Dan Strauss probably closes his too. But that's probably it. I mean, I don't know. I suppose Ron Davis could have a shot. It's an outside shot. But, even if Morales wins, that is basically going to be 8 out of 9 city council people that Bruce Harrell feels really good about working with. You could say Dan Strauss, I guess, is the more progressive in those two races. But, that's a little oversimplification. I don't think I think, he works with the mayor's office fine. So, I think this is Bruce Harrell's City Hall now because he's gonna get a lot of support now from the city council. I mean, he had it before. It's not like he wasn't really fighting against the ultra progressive city councils we've seen in the past. But this is basically a clean. This is basically going to be a super majority for him on the second floor of the city council, and will be interesting to see what he does with that.
Yeah, and just looking at that, and the kind of backstory of this, I wonder if you have any thoughts about this piece. The Times has reported this; other outlets have too. Business-led coalitions outspent labor 6-1 in these different races, with the independent expenditure committees out there. I guess that was the difference. Do you have a sense about that?
I mean, I think I think that it's not entirely surprising that this. I mean, looking at the last mayoral election and when Sarah Nelson was elected, it was clear this is where the electorate was going already. I don't think it was just because of the spending that this are the results. That said, I think the business community saw the opportunity and also clearly, as we've talked about before, clearly learned the lessons of the 2019 election too. They spent really heavily this time, but they spent in a way that never really drew much attention to themselves until maybe some stories popped up in the last week about this. But it was not enough to make this election about business and their spending. Tammy Morales in the last week or so kind of put out some ads saying, don't let business buy this election. But it was the fact of how flat that message fell. I mean, just was clearly that was not what this election was about. I mean, I think the spending was subtle. Well, I wouldn't call it subtle because there was a lot of money, but it was just not. It was not front and center like it has been in the past.
Fair. And I guess I wanted to talk about this one other piece. If this progressive swing for later votes holds true, it would appear that Seattle City Council member Teresa Mosqueda can win out over Burien Mayor Sofia Aragon. That election night tally 50.2% to 49.4% in favor of Mosqueda. I just wanted to touch on this to wrap up, and I think this kind of accentuates or echoes your thoughts here, David. The idea of having Teresa Mosqueda switching teams, how that affects the city council and the county council potentially going forward.
Well, I mean, if you think about blocks or mandates or whatever, I mean, her leaving amplifies the power of the people who won last night, because it's a clear, regardless of what happens with Morales or Strauss, I mean, it's a clear block of a certain kind of candidate, which is close to Bruce Harrell, and they're going to be able to vote in her replacement. I think there's a scenario in which the city council, in which Mosqueda could resign like tomorrow, and the current city council could vote in her replacement. That I would be really surprised if they did that, because that would be, that would be kind of a Mitch McConnell-esque move, and I don't think that would be taken very kindly to kind of race to beat in the next council. So the odds are that not only do last night's elections sort of hold a lot of power, but it's you can add an extra whatever 15% of power on top of that, because this group of people is going to be able to vote in her replacement, and so it's almost certainly going to be another Bruce Harrell ally.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see that breakdown, and we'll see where these numbers swing. But I did want to look, if I could, real quickly with you, David, at the housing levy results from last night. 66% voting in favor. The Times has called this one too. And I just have to come back to this. Even tripling this measure in size from $290 million to more than $970 million for the next 7-year span did nothing to stop voters from saying yes on this. Is this one of those situations that just transcends the usual progressive, people who want more taxes versus the moderate debate here, people who want less? Are Seattleites just always going to vote yes on property tax levies? What do you think about this?
Until Seattle voters vote against one, I will assume they will vote for every one. I think that's the easy money is you vote. I mean, and we talk a lot about moderates and the progressive candidates. Very few voters in Seattle see themselves as being moderate. I think it's a useful term to an extent because relative to the context of Seattle, but
sure, okay.
Not people voting for Joy Hollingsworth do not see themselves as conservative or even moderate, and so they're voting for Joy Hollingsworth and then also voting for housing levies. And I think what this housing levy does too is probably, I mean, I'm a transportation reporter. I'm interested in the next transportation levy. I think it's a green light for the city to not really back off on what they asked for on the transportation levy. The transportation levy has had a little more struggles than the housing levies, and it's not as salient as maybe homelessness. But, again, we have not found the limit or even come close to it on what Seattle voters will approve on levies.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It was triple what it was last time. This time around, it was double what it was last time in 2016 from 2009. So I think you're right. And important to point out, too, there no formalized opposition to that housing levy out there. So it definitely sailed through. So we're going to keep you posted, folks, on all these different election results as the votes keep swinging in. And a side note here, I wanted to make sure that I put this out there. The district that is leading the way with write-in candidates so far, with 109 write-ins, District 6, Fremont. You go right on being center of the universe. Way to go there, folks. All right, up next, the push for transportation impact fees has hit an interesting milestone. A story a bit lost in all the election headlines. Coming your way next on Now Hear This. Well, behind all the excitement of Election Day, the business of the council proceeded this week with a measure that has been fast-tracked through the council process by council members Herbold and Peterson. So it's for the council to consider transportation impact fees, basically fees charged to developers to go towards transportation infrastructure. A hearing examiner said on Monday these fees would have no adverse environmental impact, this part of the usual environmental review, but would transportation impact fees have an economic impact? There are a number of housing developers saying yes, these fees will simply raise the cost of housing, like Patrick Foley of Lake Union Partners, who built the Midtown Square project at 23rd and Union with Africa Town, a number of other partners. He says this housing project, with half the units on the city block deemed affordable, just barely penciled out.
If we were to consider the kind of fees that we're talking about today, or even allow them to move forward, I would have to underwrite to that. That would have added $6.5 to $7 million of cost, which would have killed this project. And all of the cool retailers and shop owners that we have wouldn't exist today. It would still be the same place. So I'm asking you not to consider moving this forward.
David, you've written about this for the Seattle Times, and I wanted to dive into this with you. Councilmember Herbold has gone to great lengths to try to say the council is only considering the use of transportation impact fees, not implementing them, but she wanted the possibility in the mix as the council works on the comprehensive plan next year. Can you give us that overall look on what the council is doing here?
Yeah, I mean, it becomes a little technical. I mean, on the one hand, it is what she says, which is it's not an implementation of impact fees. It's changing the comprehensive plan to make them a possibility for future councils. That's not untrue. Her framing it as a purely procedural vote, though, falls flat when you consider how much they're racing to get this done before the end of the year and get a vote in. I mean, if it was just purely procedural, then, there was a hearing scheduled on this for November 29th, but having the hearing then would have meant that Herbold and Peterson wouldn't have had the opportunity to vote on it. And so they pushed really hard to move it up. I mean, that gives you a sense for, this is something they see as being really important. And, I think there's another layer to it, which again, is fairly technical, but they're, to make this amendment, they have to submit like a project list to go along with that of things that maybe these impact fees could fund.
Right.
That's no small task because the current list they have is from 2018. A lot of the projects on that list have been funded by other sources, so they would not be funded by impact fees. Mm-hmm. So either the city council is going to have to spend the next few weeks updating that project list, or they're going to have to come back later and amend the comprehensive plan again and attach a new project list. So, it's kind of it gets a little lost. At the end of the day, this is a sort of philosophical fight over the role that developers play, I think, in the city, which is, a lot of people look at this and say, we have a housing crisis. There aren't enough units. And by the way, if you look at the city's permitting data, the amount of housing that's going to be built in the next few years is plummeting. It's going way down. And so the argument is by putting more fees on it, you are making the math on these projects worse than it already is. And it's pretty bad right now because of interest rates. And therefore, it's kind of a guarantee to not build more housing. The alternative is we have relied really heavily on property taxes to fund things like transportation, or as we just talked about, housing. And impact fees is another source of revenue that the city could use to build out, Vision Zero or whatever it might be, that does not rely on property taxes. So, I do think that this election probably increases the chances that they are eventually passed, because I think this is a slate of candidates that is probably more friendly to them than some of the people who who lost or are likely to lose last night. So,
interesting.
I think it's like you said, it gets a little technical, and therefore people's eyes glaze over. But it has potential to be among the more significant policy changes in City Hall and in the last several years, I would say.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I mean, just looking at this list of projects that was kind of rushed through, you mentioned that piece, and then you look at the possible fees, and there was a great breakdown in Publicola about this. The new fee could actually cost 5 to 6 times as much as annual property taxes on some of these larger buildings out there. So just seeing these projects pencil out is an important part of it. And I guess I also wanted to touch on another piece of it, which is this. And again, I am putting the cart before the horse. The council hasn't even discussed this, but this idea of going forward with transportation impact fees, I thought the Urbanist did a good job of pointing this out. This idea of, okay, we put these fees in. That doesn't mean that you're going to put in new traffic lights right outside that new development you're building. You're just putting money into a fund where these projects could be built basically anywhere around the city. And I think that's another piece of this that developers are saying, whoa, wait a minute. If we're talking about impact fees and the impact of our project, why is this going to this larger fee for transportation where these projects could be built halfway across the city?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, because that is the point of impact fees, is you are mitigating the impact of the thing that you're doing. But if it's going into a broader pool, then your argument is that it's not specific projects that are having an impact. It's just development generally having an impact on the city. Yeah, I don't know what kind of. I wouldn't be surprised, I guess, if there are legal challenges to that. I don't know how that works. But if these are passed, and it's a big if. I don't think it would happen until at earliest probably like August or something, because there'd have to be a big long policy discussion about it. But if it did happen, it would be very interesting to see how those housing permits react, because if you quoted the guy Patrick Foley, I heard that too, and he said I would have added $6 to $7 million to that project, and it just wouldn't have happened at all. And I think that's probably true. I mean, especially projects like that where it's a mix of affordable and market rate housing. I would be, that makes the math on those a little tighter. And I don't think those projects, despite some of the kind of images of developers rolling in cash or whatever, I don't know that some of those projects are actually making all that much money. And so, it would be very interesting to see what this would do to development in Seattle, but then also development on the, outside of Seattle. Would developers take their resources and focus on in Bellevue or East Side cities?
Right. And there are a number of different cities, 70 of them around the state of Washington, that actually use transportation impact fees. I know Councilmember Peterson is quick to point out that part of it. But it just gets to a root question for me, David, and I think we've touched on this a few times in the past. When you look at different policies like missing middle housing, I'll just use that as one example here. You can pass a policy like that, but if it doesn't really pencil out to actually build the units, then it doesn't necessarily happen. I know we've talked about this, the example of Portland. Yeah, they've got some new policies in place that say you can build these larger units or more units elsewhere, but it's not really penciling out. There isn't some wave of new development there that's saying, yeah, let's build these duplexes in this neighborhood, because I just don't think the dollars are there. The developers aren't willing to do it for the buck.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And especially now, I think maybe... And I think you can broaden that out. I mean, we're talking about impact fees, but the missing middle housing bills and stuff. Had those been passed when Hala and Ed Murray had first proposed them, I do think that we probably could have seen some upswing of duplexes, just because the development market was so crazy and interest rates were so low, and it was very easy to build and demand. That's over. I think for now, for development to pencil out, it's kind of got to be these larger developments, bigger apartment buildings, and a lot of the kind of missing middle stuff is opening up the opportunity for owners of single family homes to redevelop their homes, turn them into duplexes, add ADUs, do stuff like that. Again, interest rates to do any of that stuff is kind of prohibitive right now. I would be surprised if anyone's looking to take out loans to remodel their house into a duplex. So, back to the impact fees. I don't know how much these impact fees would actually bring in. I mean, they're saying between $200 and $750 million over 10 years, but that's kind of based, I think, on previous development patterns. So I think there's a possibility it could be quite a bit less than that.
That's a great point there too, David. And I guess I was leading all this up to another big point when it comes to planning in the city of Seattle. Delay for the release of the comprehensive plan for the city. This is that 10-year planning document. All cities have to have them. We're due for a renewal in 2024. Originally, the mayor's office said we'd have a draft of this in April. That was pushed to September. Now, Publicola is reporting this. The mayor's office saying, well, it's going to be released late this year or early next. Why is that a big deal? The delay gives people less time to review this pretty important planning document, which has to be approved by the end of 2024. And David, just hearkening back to that mandatory housing affordability program in 2017 and 2018, there were dozens of meetings out there, so much input, and that was just for housing. Does less than a year's worth of time to review the comp plan give Seattle enough time to really give it the thorough going over that it needs?
Yeah, I don't know. I've never been through one of these comp plan updates, so I don't actually have a great sense of what that process feels like. I mean, sometimes Seattle has a way of reviewing things for too long, but
that's true.
This is a pretty significant document. I don't know the answer to that, frankly.
Yeah, I wish I did too, but I do know it's something that the city is talking about a lot now, and we're going to see some new council members who are really just cutting their teeth in terms of being elected leaders for the first time, engaging with this pretty complex and Byzantine process for the city. So a big question ahead, something that the next city council will have to jump in. Yeah, David.
Well, and it's probably not going to be their top priority. People did not elect them to update the comprehensive plan. People elected them to, figure out homelessness and public safety. And so, and yet this is equally, if not more important and complicated than those things. And so it will require a lot of attention, but I don't think this is going to be the first thing that these new elected council members are going to want to sit down and start talking about.
Great point. All right, well, coming up next, a new protected intersection in the city of Seattle. What does this special designation mean? Why is it happening? David's got the story coming up on Transportation Talk. David, you recently wrote a piece in the Seattle Times about what the city is calling its first protected intersection in South Lake Union. We're talking about Thomas Street and Dexter Avenue North. Talk to us about this. Why is this happening? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, this is, we kind of wrote about it because it's at the intersection where the Seattle police officer was driving almost 75 miles per hour and hit and killed a young woman, Genevieve Kandula. That there's not any indication that the design of the intersection in particular would have changed the outcome there because the officer was driving as fast as he was. But it's become kind of
right.
Yeah, it's become kind of a, anytime something tragic like that happens, the physical location tends to take on a little more significance. And so, we wanted to write about it because now that physical location is changing. As far as the sort of broader approach to that intersection, it's part of this kind of larger project that the city has its sights set on Thomas Street, which, if you're a bicyclist trying to go from South Lake Union to downtown, sometimes it gets a little windy in there to make that connection, and you end up on roads that aren't that pleasant. Thomas Street would kind of, the idea there is would act as that better connection for walkers and bikers, kind of going between the city's two biggest neighborhoods. This protected intersection Seattle doesn't have any of them, but the philosophy is basically the same as a protected bike lane, but a lot of times protected bike lanes end at the intersection where a lot of collisions and deaths can happen. And so this puts some concrete barriers so that essentially what you're doing is you're extending that bike lane through that protection that you received from the bike lane through the intersection and ideally letting, making it so there are fewer conflicts between drivers and cyclists.
Got it. And this, as I understood it in reading in your piece, this is something that the city's been talking about for years, but it's been a funding issue. This costs a lot of money to do. And I know the mayor said, well, we don't have the dollars yet. I mean, this has been a bit of there's been some bucks behind this that have stopped this from happening too. It's been talked about, though, for a while, this kind of intersection.
Yeah, I mean, the whole Thomas project has been talked about for a long time. Like you said, it did get its progress was kind of halted when a good chunk of the budget was cut in 2022 by Mayor Harrell. This is just one piece of it. It's not the full project. Andrew Lewis has introduced an amendment that would, via the sale of some surplus property, restore that funding to the budget and perhaps move the project forward. The sale of surplus of city-owned land is always, there's always some fight over that because it's kind of seen as free money and people want it for the different priorities. So I don't know if it ends up getting passed, but the broader project could move forward if that amendment's adopted.
Just real quick on this, what does it do to car traffic exactly? Can you help me just visualize that, what that would look like at that intersection?
Yeah, at that intersection, so it's interesting. It puts a kind of barrier in the middle, so you can go east-west if you're in a car. So you could cut over across Thomas to Dexter, and that kind of lets you connect. But if you're a car, it would, and you're coming down Thomas, it would block you. So you'd have to detour off to, Dexter or a kind of busier, wider road. The idea is, again, it's not closing it off to cars, but you're turning that street into, I guess it's not exactly a Voner for whatever those are called, but it is,
yes,
it is discouraging drivers from using that in favor of cyclists or walkers.
Yeah, you really need to work on your Dutch there, David. But that was a pretty good shot at Voner, the Amsterdam special there. I know we've talked about that way to get bikes and pedestrians through for a while here. But we need to wrap up here, David. And I did want to make sure I asked this last question because I was thinking about starting a GoFundMe to see if we could lure Shohei Ohtani to join the Mariners. I wanted to ask if you were good for like $10 because we only need to raise about $65 million, I think.
Yeah, right. Just for this year, though, I think we need closer to 600.
That's a good point. A 10-year deal is going to take more than that. What do you think, man? Do you have any vibe on that at all?
If we get 60 million people to donate $10, then we're good. I mean, he's probably going to go to the Dodgers, but he doesn't say anything publicly, so there's a certain amount of mystery about it. People thought he was going to go to the Mariners before, and at the last minute he went to the Angels. So, there's still some hope, I think. But I would be surprised, honestly, if he did not go to the Dodgers. But I'm willing to be surprised.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll get back to you about that GoFundMe. We'll see what happens here. Thank you, David, as always, for joining me here. Thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews. If you're listening to this on Wednesday or throughout the week, very much glad that you're here with us. You can always find out what's brewing right here in local politics. This podcast is on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen out there. And please find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. Need your support to keep things running here. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media as well. We'll see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.